the plan is basically to just go through everything. We can go into as much or as little detail as you guys want. We're going to cover kind of fundamentals of compression, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Then we're going to go through a real world mix because I could sit here and talk for a long time about the plugin and all the intricacies of it because there's a lot to talk about. But I think that could get a little bit boring. So I've got a track up ready to go. We could even do a couple. Yep, filming this, so there will be a replay. Yeah, we could even go through a couple of tracks, something kind of rock-esque, so that we've got some live drums, and then maybe something else a bit more modern, pop, something like that. And yeah, we're just gonna get into it really. So I'm gonna start by sharing my screen. And then maybe type in the chat what you would say is your kind of level of understanding of compression, beginner, intermediate, or pro, just so I can get a feel for where everyone's at in general with compression. Intermediate seems to be the most common. Done the 10-hour course. Yep, cool. Nick's a pro, intermediate plus, pro-ish. Okay. So not a lot of beginners, interestingly. Um, and for those of you who have said intermediate, where's your where are your gaps? Like, where do you feel a lack of clarity? Is there any element of compression that you're like, I get the basics, but I'm really not sure about this? Or where are you struggling, in other words? Lack of practice, fine tune attack and release. Not sure about knee, feedback versus feed forward. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Still not sure what type of compressor for when. So the different styles of compression. Understand it, but hard to hear. So maybe like a good theoretical understanding, but yeah, finding difficulty in actually hearing the differences despite knowing kind of what they should be. Lack of repetition. Like to understand deeply everywhere in which open compressor is different. Actually fine tuning of fills. What are you looking to get out of today? Would be my other question. And while you're typing that, yeah, a lot of these challenges, I think there's a mix here of some kind of basic stuff. We've probably got like the full gambit here of some kind of fundamentals like knee and then and attack and release, and then maybe some more advanced stuff, feedback, feed forward. But we won't skip ahead then too much. Want to understand the visualizer on Open Comp. Will there be a manual for Open Compressor? Yes, there will. I'll post that in the chat. It's included in the download files. You can also find it in the FAQs on woodstockaudio.com. I'll post it in the chat here as well. Which compressor to use and when, use case fits, best understanding of compression, open compressor and compression as well. Versatility, how to best use this plugin. Auto dynamic range, yeah, we can dig into that because that's quite unique to open compressor. How it's used, cool. So we'll get into some real world examples for sure. Algo the compressor uses when it's set to auto threshold mode, yeah. So lots of mentions of auto threshold, and that is something that people have liked a lot. So I think we'll dig into that for sure. How to use clipper only, limiter only, extra controls, overall understanding, replacing 1176 LA2A, various emulations. Why is it called open, by the way? The reason it's called open is because you can see under the hood. It's open. It's an open box. Or another term is like open worked. So in the watch world, for example, you have it's like skeleton watches where you can kind of see inside, and one of the terms used for that is open work. So it's that kind of idea of you can see under the hood. It's yeah, that's where the open part comes from. Cool. Okay, let's dig in. So this track here, some of you might have heard this before. We used it on an event in the past with mastering.com. The artist is Cole Ritter, and the song is called Fast Car Slow. Produced by Reed Sorrell, who some of you may know, great producer from Nashville. And I've literally just pulled in the tracks. So we're going to be starting from kind of scratch here. But for now, just to kind of get into this, let's grab the lead vocal and we'll just use this project in various ways at some point. Once we've gone through some basics, we'll get a rough mix on this and then dig into kind of like a real world example. But let's just check you guys can hear this.
I was built for speed. You got a fire in your gasoline, but this.
Cool. We've got a drum loop, which is nice. We might have to open up a different project if we want to get into some kick and snare stuff, because on this one we've just got like a loop, but we can do some kind of drum bass compression. I actually find drums are a really nice place to kind of just hear compression. So we'll play around with this. So for those of you who are less familiar, you probably, you obviously would have seen this on the product page and all that kind of stuff. But let's start with just like a high level overview of all the different features. And this is the default state when you load it up. For anyone who is on the latest version, we're about to release another one, but it's just a small update. One of the changes we made in 1.0.5 was updating the default settings. So if you're on an older version, your default might look a little bit different. But pretty much when you load it up, we've got a bit of compression happening already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute this so that we can actually just see it and I can talk over it for a second. Steve, RMS by default. Yeah, so this is, I can get into the weeds of this a little bit more, but that was a big part I was thinking about is what to have as the default settings. Bear in mind, you can always save a new default in your DAW. So something to, again, just kind of be aware of. If you want to resize it, that's some of the feedback we got is it's opening too big on the screen and that kind of stuff. Set it to the size you want. Go to save as default, and it's going to be slightly different in different DAWs. But you can see I've kind of made it smaller. Then if I open it again, it will reopen at that size. So if you prefer it larger or smaller or however you like it, you can default to that. I'm going to make it nice and big today so we can see it clearly on the screen. The other thing we're working on for version 2, which is going to be a free update for everyone, some of the feedback we got as well is making some of the text larger. So if you do want to use it, if you want to have like multiple instances open, or if you're visually impaired, that's one piece of feedback we've got. So we're going to work on that in version 2 a little bit. But yeah, you can always create the size you like. Personally, if I'm using lots of instances or just a lot of the time when I'm mixing, I'll actually use it in closed mode because then it takes up less screen real estate. And then if you really want to see what's going on under the hood, or if you're still learning compression, or you find the visualizers kind of generally more helpful, you can default to open mode. But I actually have it set so that it defaults to closed. Where can we see what version you have? So that is again going to depend on your DAW. In Logic, you can go to the plugin manager, and if you search it, it will tell you which version. That's something else we'll probably put in V2 is it'll show you somewhere here what the version is, and then it will give you a little notification if you need to update it. So RMS by default, when I was thinking through the default settings for this, the interesting thing about this compressor is it can basically do anything. Like that's the whole idea, right? It's open, you can see what's happening under the hood, but I wanted something that was also an all-in-one Swiss Army knife, capable of emulating, not perfectly recreating, but emulating all different styles of compression. It's never going to be a 100% accurate emulation of an LA2A or an 1176 as much as a dedicated plugin that's built to kind of emulate those perfectly is going to be, because there's lots of weird stuff that happens in different units, and that modeling can get extremely intense. And that's a whole other area of plugin development, is figuring out how to model real world equipment in the most accurate way possible. It's extremely CPU intensive. There's different methods for doing that. That's not what this is. This is about having one tool that can get 95% of the way there, maybe 90, depending on how you look at it, but can do that with lots of different compressors and also give you the ability to mix and match. So, for example, if you want the speed of an 1176, but the attack and release ballistics, which is just a term for kind of the attack and release curves of an LA2A, you can do that. You can kind of create these custom compressors. And also, it means you don't have to have like 20 different compressors. Now, the challenge that poses is if we just go to like default, the kind of settings you would expect from a stock compressor in your door, which is peak, and we'll get into this, peak, regular, feed forward. It would sound a little bit quote unquote sterile if we didn't have any saturation, that kind of stuff, because at that point that's the most bog standard compressor you could possibly create. And some people might like that as their default state. So if you do, you can set that up. You can go to save a new default. But what we actually decided to do was go for something a little bit vibier as the default state, because I wanted it to also just sound good as soon as you put it on and also sound a little bit more unique. So that's why we opted for RMS, which gives it this kind of gooier, slower, but more musical. And I'll get into these terms because it's like, well, what does gooey mean? What does musical mean? We'll give some demonstrations. But it slows things down effectively. Feedback also slows things down a little bit. And we've got odd and even saturation turned on at 20%. And what that means is when you load it up, it sounds good out of the box. So you can hear straight away it's adding kind of more depth of more of the three-dimensional sound. A big part of that is going to be the saturation. If we went to kind of bog standard settings compared to this, there's more depth to it. And we'll get into that a lot more. But just to answer the question, that's the thinking behind having RMS as a default, is just something more interesting. So you can throw it on and it sounds great out of the box. So let's do a high level overview of all of these sections before we kind of get into specifics and really deep dive into all of these. So in closed view, we've got all the controls. And this is our main plate here, where we control the compressor itself. On the left, we've got our advanced section. On the right, we've got these modules, and these are kind of additional processors like clipping, limiting, saturation, low level, which I'll get into, tone. Then when you go into open mode, you can see everything that's happening under the hood. So this is our waveform visualizer, which we're quite used to seeing on compressors with a before and after. So if I slam this, you can see the before waveform behind there. Then we have harmonics, knee, EQ, which is kind of like our frequency analyzer, and the oscilloscope, which shows us kind of a visualization of the shape of the waveform. So that's kind of our main view. This is what you're going to be using most of the time. We also have this waveform view. You can either click waveform up here, or down here there's a full screen button. And initially this was the only view we had, these two kind of views combined, but I found myself wanting to see this bigger in some cases. This is what we're used to seeing with a lot of modern compression plugins. So we have this kind of full screen option, so you can really zoom in on the waveform. So that's everything at a high level. What we'll do now is run through, I think, some basics of compression. Once we've covered that, we'll be able to dig a lot deeper into this main window here. Then we'll get into some advanced compression, which is where we'll spend some time over here. And then we'll get into the kind of modules and move beyond compression. Other than that, the only thing to note is this bar across the top. We've got our views. We've got oversampling low and high. Delta Solo, and we'll go into all of this as well. Stereo modes, VU, sidechain. So this is kind of like our settings up here with the bypass button on the left. And then we've got our preset browser. And you can save your own presets like this. We also sent out a couple more presets in the most recent update. Another LA2A, and then I think there was one more new one. Maybe it was the I can't remember, to be honest. I think it was maybe the Fairchild or something like, or the Varimu. I think it was the Varimu actually, was another one we sent out. So when it comes to compression, just going really back to basics for a second, just to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page and has the same understanding. We're effectively just using the compressor to turn volume up and down. That's really all it is. You can basically drill everything in mixing down to volume. You can think of volume as in, you know, how you balance your mix, literally on the volume faders as being like one of the most important elements when you're mixing. And then you can think of EQ as just turning up or down different frequencies. We're just increasing or decreasing the volume at different places. And you can think of compression and dynamic tools as a way of automatically controlling dynamics to achieve certain outcomes. So all a compressor is doing is compressing when it gets too loud. It's just a kind of an automated device that we're saying, hey, when it gets too loud, turn it down. At its core, that's really all it is. So if we want to build a tool that does that, and yeah, we have this problem of a vocal that's too loud in certain parts, or a snare where they don't hit the snare drum consistently, and we want to address that problem with a tool that can do it for us, rather than literally like kind of writing in the automation or going through every single snare hit that's too loud and turning it down manually, which sometimes is a good option. But if we want to automate that, then the first thing we need to decide is like, okay, well, what volume at which do we want this to turn it down? And that's our threshold. So when the audio crosses the threshold, that's our kind of instruction to this plugin to say, hey, when it gets beyond this, i.e. it gets too loud, that's when we're going to turn it down. You can see as I pull this down, this line here is showing us our threshold in relation to the audio. If we want to kind of create a really high correlation between what our threshold is set at and what we're actually seeing here, then there's a couple of things we need to do. If we go really fast attack and release, really hard knee, and you can see on the image down here, we'll dig into knee a little bit more, but this is a hard knee at 0. Really high ratio. Now, when we pull that threshold down, it's going to be catching basically everything that's above that level. And even then, because this is a very fast transient, even with a super fast attack time, we're not quite catching that. With a limiter, we could use look ahead to catch those transients. We'll come back to that. But in essence, you can see how we bring that threshold down. That's the point at which we're saying, turn it down if it gets loud. You can see that really clearly here. This is our gain reduction line. So in most compressors, you'll have some kind of a meter that tells you how much you're turning it down. So you can see what the compressor is actually doing, how much it's reducing the gain by. And you can also see that on this line. It's showing us at every moment how much the gain is being reduced. So we're getting down to just beyond -12 there. So that's threshold. The next thing, if we were building this from scratch, and we're saying, hey, we just want you to turn it down when it's too loud. The next question is, okay, but how much by? I can turn it down when it gets too loud. Here's the point where I'm going to turn it down. But how much should I turn it down by? Should I make sure nothing goes over that, or should I just turn it down a little bit? And that's our ratio. So if you set a 2-to-1 ratio, Then the audio goes 10 decibels above the threshold. It's going to reduce that by a ratio of 2 to 1. So let's say our threshold is at minus 20. Our audio goes to minus 10. We have a 2 to 1 ratio. How much gain reduction are we going to get? Just ignore attack time and that kind of stuff for a second. Just assuming a very simple compressor hard knee. So we're at minus 20. Audio goes to minus 10, 2 to 1 ratio. So Stefan said minus 15, so he's kind of skipped the next step ahead, which is what's the output. But yeah, Ralph minus 5 and Stefan, yeah, minus 5. So it's gone 10 dB above the threshold, 2 to 1 ratio. It's going to reduce that by 5 decibels. And then our output is going to be negative 15. Does that make sense to everyone? Does everyone understand that? Anyone struggle with that? Cool. So then we have knee. And this is where the knee display, I can make this a little bit bigger. John, yeah, when I say output, if you think of like what's going into the compressor and what's coming out, again, if we kind of think of a very simple situation where we don't have makeup gain or any of this other stuff, it's just audio comes in at minus 10. The threshold on the limiter is minus 20. So it's 10 dB above the threshold. Ratio is 2 to 1. So it's going to drop that by 5 decibels because it's 10 dB difference. It's gone 10 decibels above the threshold. So 5 decibels. If the audio was at minus 10 and you take 5 decibels off of that, the result or the output is going to be negative 15, which is 0, minus 10, minus 5. Makes sense? So then we have knee, and you can see the knee display down here. Just conceptually, what does knee do? If we set a more aggressive ratio here, and we have a hard knee, then that is kind of the simplest form of compression. That example we just gave, where it's just, minus 20, threshold is audio at minus 10, threshold at minus 20. We're reducing it. It's very simple because as soon as it goes above that threshold, it's cutting it, reducing the volume equivalent to the ratio as soon as it crosses the threshold. When we bring in a soft knee, so if we make that knee wider, which is what a soft knee means, you can see it actually does two things. It extends the range, this kind of where this crossover point is. So that's our threshold, it's like the crossover. We add a soft knee, it brings it up and down. So what it actually means is we start getting, if I just set this at minus 20, and then if we have a soft knee, we actually start getting gain reduction at like minus, we can even go almost down to like minus 30. So then it's a lot more complex to try and figure out in your head. And you can't, it's not simple math. For example, if we say like, okay, the audio's at minus 10, the threshold's at minus 20, and the ratio's 2 to 1, or even 10 to 1 or something, and then we've got a knee of 18 decibels, it's going to be, you can't just do that in your head. So that's where it starts to get a little bit more complicated if you were trying to literally figure it out from scratch. But conceptually, you can see how it extends either way. It softens that crossover point. But I don't think much when I think about the impact of knee, I don't think much about like softening that crossover. I think more about this left part and how it creates this, extends the range down of what the compressor's doing and starts grabbing stuff that's below the threshold. And what that means is you get this much kind of gentler or almost, you could think of it as like tailored compression where the closer it gets to the threshold, the more gain reduction happens. But we actually start compressing much lower than that. So it's kind of, if you get close to the knee but not super close, you're going to get a little bit of compression. If you get really close to the knee, you're going to get more compression. You go beyond the knee, you're going to get even more. So it kind of creates this gradual effect of the more volume you drive into the compressor, the more it compresses it. And this has various kind of outcomes. It does just sound softer. So when you think of like hard knee, which is all the way to the left, 0 decibels, and it's measured in decibels because we can think of it as like the range here. So if I set this to like 10 decibels, the difference between here and here is 10 decibels. You can see we're at minus 20. We apply a 10 dB knee and it creates this 10 dB range. So now actually our compression starts at minus 25. So you can kind of do the math a little bit. Minus 20 threshold, 10 dB knee. The center point of that knee is at the threshold. So we don't extend 10 dB below. We create a range of 10 dB. So that's going to be 5 above, 5 below. So again, quick question. If we're at a minus 20 threshold and we're at a let's say 5 dB knee, when will compression start? Put that in the chat. Minus 20 threshold, 5 dB knee, when will compression start? Yeah, Gus got it. Minus 22.5 and John. So yeah, a few of you said minus 25, but again, think of it as the range. So the easiest example there was when you can literally see here if I do 10 dB, it's this line here. It's a little bit faint, but you can see it gets down to halfway between. So this range here is 10 decibels, but it's centered at threshold. So it means half of it's below, half of it's above. So it's actually half. So at 5, it's 2.5 below, which is minus 17.5. You don't have to like know this math really when you're thinking, in the heat of a mix. You're not thinking about this stuff. It's just to kind of conceptualize it now and get an understanding of what that's actually doing. And then let's have a listen so we can actually hear that. And I'll go quite aggressive. Let's go for like a slower attack so we're not absolutely slamming it. Kind of a medium release. If I hold Alt here, or sorry, Option on a Mac, that resets it. Default is 15 attack, 200 release, which is I mean, you could use that on basically anything. Unless you've got like a really fast transient. They're like what I would call kind of mid-range attack and release. And let's just listen to the difference between soft knee and hard knee. Okay, what do you hear? What do you hear as the difference between the two? What stands out to you? It's actually really interesting. I don't think I've ever tried it that extreme before. Transients, softer transients, sound softer. Attack more aggressive on hard knee. Hard knee is more aggressive on the transients, less aggressive on the snare. Snare slightly fuller, a roundness added with soft knee, more muffled. Compression less abrupt, softer. Hard knee brings it closer. Yeah, so I think generally it's like literally it sounds like hard versus soft. So the people who are kind of like it sounds like rounder, it sounds literally sounds softer. In this specific case with this source material, it is really interesting how it affects the snare, especially. So someone said here, hard knee brings it closer. Snare sounds fuller. And I think they're referring to soft knee, less aggressive on the snare. Yeah, it's interesting. To me, it sounds like there's more depth with soft knee, and then hard knee pulls everything forwards. And with the hard knee, it sounds kind of like choked a little bit, but that could be a good thing if you want your kick and the snare to be like right at the front of the mix. It's creating that impact of kind of pulling everything towards you. But with the soft knee, it adds this really nice depth and openness. Absolutely. Ralph said, so can you use knee to locate in the cube? And by that, he's referring to kind of these dimensions that we can think of with the mix as this kind of 3-dimensional or even 4-dimensional cube. And 100%, this is one of the many things that will impact that kind of front to back perception, which is really influenced by how you manage transients. Like the simple way we create front to back depth is like volume, or like reverb is like easy to think about how that impacts space. But transients are really where, that's where it's made. That's what separates kind of the intermediates from the pros is really understanding the impact of compression and limiting and transient shaping on transients and how that impacts front to back depth. So then kind of moving along here, left to right, we've got our VU meter. We've already touched on that a little bit. Very simple. It just shows you how much gain reduction is being applied. There's different ways to approach a gain reduction meter. So I think some compressors, especially analog compressors, they won't be as responsive as this because they would be using VU or a slower, like literally having to like physically move the needle would be a little bit slower than what we have here, which is just basically 100% accuracy. It just moves in real time with the gain reduction that's happening. But yeah, very straightforward. Then we have attack. So attack and release, conceptually, what they're doing is dictating how quickly the audio gets turned down. So it's not a delay for like when gain reduction starts. It's the speed at which that gain reduction goes from no gain reduction to lots of gain reduction. And there's various different definitions. Some people say it's how long it takes the compressor to go from 0 to 60% gain reduction. But you can just think of it as how quickly it clamps down. So if we were in theory, if we had like a instant zero, like 0.00, like actually zero attack time, it would just be instant. But the reality of analog compressors, especially, is there is a delay as the audio moves through the circuitry, that even with really fast attack times, which weren't possible for a long time because there weren't components that can do that, even like really fast ones like VCA compressors, 1176, they go really fast, but not like instant. So there's always kind of a delay there. Interestingly, with digital compressors, it basically is instant. So when you get down to like 0.02, that's one sample. That's actually less than a sample. If you're using like really fast attack times, it's worth putting it into high oversampling because that oversamples the compressor. Whereas in low oversampling, we're not oversampling the compressor, we're just oversampling the saturation to prevent aliasing. We can come back to that. But in high mode, it actually oversamples the compressor as well at, from memory, a 2x and then 4x on saturation in high mode. And what that means is if you're using really fast attack times, there's actually a difference between like 0.02 and 0.011 or whatever. I think one sample of 44.1 kilohertz is about 24 microseconds or something like that. So 24 microseconds is 0.024 milliseconds. There's 1,000 microseconds in a millisecond. So this is basically instant. In the digital world, 0.02, that's less than a sample. So the compressor's getting a read on the audio, and it can't in the same sample reduce it because it's only just happened unless you introduce look ahead. We'll come back to that. But the next sample, it's like applying basically like the full gain reduction. On the other end of this spectrum, we have 250 milliseconds, which is very slow. And you can see this whole transient basically getting through. We're a little bit loud on this. Let's gain stage this down a touch. Input gain is something that we're building into version 2, by the way. So you can see even if I do a really high ratio, hard knee, super low threshold, that snare transient is still coming through. And you can kind of see the attack curve here. You can see how it's clamping down gradually. We have like this really sharp initial burst. If we zoom in here, zoom buttons up here, by the way. We can see this fast initial transient, and then you can kind of see the curve of the attack as it's clamping down. So that's a good visualization of what a slow attack or attack time in general is doing. If we use a fast attack, we've got such aggressive settings here that like literally nothing's coming through. So huge difference. And if we get down to 0.02, it's basically just not letting anything through. And there you can see it's basically instant. Even then, there's a little bit getting through. But that is basically kind of straight down versus you can see this is like a bit more gradual. So this is, yeah, this is the cool thing about having these visualizers. If I get rid of the makeup gain as well, right now our after waveform is actually louder than our before. So you can see the before kind of tucked behind there because we've applied makeup gain. And this waveform is going to show you just like the actual output. So if you do saturation, like all of that is going to influence what you see as the main waveform. If I get rid of the makeup gain, then you can see now the after is quieter than the before. So does that make sense for everyone in terms of attack time? And that's before we kind of get into the implications of like how that actually affects the sound. But again, once you understand what that's actually doing, then it's purely a case of what do you want? Because a slow attack is going to let through more transient because it's literally like the transient on this snare is probably, we could zoom in and find out, but it's like very fast. It's like under a millisecond. It'll be in microseconds. So if we have a 250 millisecond attack, which is a quarter of a second, it's just getting through. Like the compressor is reacting to it. It's seeing that audio is reacting. It's still getting the kind of the signal or the trigger of like, okay, well, the audio has gone above the threshold. What's the ratio? What's the knee? How much do we reduce it? And it's like, okay, cool. We need to reduce it by this much. Let's do it over 250 milliseconds. And then it's like 1 millisecond later. So one of 250 milliseconds is already come and gone. So it's just reacting like extremely slowly. So the transient gets through. And there are other implications of kind of fast versus slow attack time. But the main thing to consider is how much transient do I want to get through? If you start thinking about material that's less transient, so a snare, very transient, but if you start thinking about like a bass guitar with like sustained notes, you've obviously got that initial transient phase with like the pick, which again is going to be a very fast, like under a millisecond transient. But then you might have these sustained notes. So that's where attack time isn't just how much transient you let through, it also changes the feel of it, the dynamics. And we could get into some more examples. Let's just see what we've got here on the bass drum bass guitar, while I talk about it. So if you imagine here, attack time is less about like, are you or aren't you catching the transients? It's more about feel because we can clamp down really quickly. And it's still, like I said, it's mostly kind of how much of the transient. But you can also, it kind of influences the dynamics, how we perceive them. So with a faster attack, it sounds a bit flatter because we're like clamping down and then we're kind of staying there. Whereas with a slower attack, like the start of the note is louder. It's not just the transient that's getting through. It's like the start of the note and then it starts clamping down. So that kind of creates this feeling of maybe the bassist is digging in more. whereas that sounds more controlled. So yeah, we can get into the nuances of that a little bit more when we actually go through this mix. But just conceptually, for the most part, attack time, think of it as how much transient you're laying through. Let's see any questions. Please reiterate the low, high oversampling. Yeah, so this is also in the manual. So low mode, even in low mode, there's oversampling on the saturation because otherwise you get something called aliasing because of the Nyquist frequency. So at 44.1 kilohertz, anything above 22 point whatever kilohertz gets reflected back down. If we oversample, so let's say our project's in 44.1 and we oversample by 2x up to 88.2, that raises the Nyquist frequency to like 40 kilohertz, so well beyond human hearing. And none of that really matters when it comes to like EQ or if we're doing any processing below 20 kilohertz. But with saturation, what you're doing is you're introducing loads of overtones. And this is a bit of a detour now into saturation. But as I add these, you can see it's adding basically multiples. So even it's adding 2x, 4x, 6x. And then if you imagine there's a frequency, let's say you've got a drum kit and the cymbals have material up at like 18 kilohertz, and then we're applying saturation and we've got like a 10x multiple of 18 kilohertz, that's 180 kilohertz is getting kind of generated. And that reflects back off the Nyquist frequency. We'll dig into this a little. Maybe that's something we could I could actually kind of show you if anyone wants to go deeper into like the point of oversampling, I could show you that because you can literally see it. So anyway, that aliasing is bad because it creates these kind of uglier off ratio frequencies that are reflecting back down. So we default to always having some oversampling on the saturation, even in low mode. Then in high mode, it's actually 4x. Yeah, I couldn't remember what it was on the compressor. It's actually 4x on both. So in high mode, it bumps up the saturation oversampling to 4x, which in all of our testing, it was like that was more than enough. Like going more than that, like 8x, whatever, the CPU cost isn't really worth the trade-off. Like at 4x, so like 44.1 up to like 160 kilohertz, it's fine. Like the aliasing is so quiet that like you don't really need to go higher than that. And then also 4x on the compressor. And oversampling a compressor is not a very common thing. Like I explained, the only reason to really do that is if you're using really fast attack time. So you actually want to go to the point where you're reacting in less than a sample. So if you imagine at 4x oversampling, that means we get 4 times the resolution effectively on the compressor. And instead of one sample actually being like, 24 microseconds, it means one sample would be like 6 microseconds. So now there's a bigger difference between like all of these like really low down here. So yeah, it would basically just be if you were using a lot of saturation, bump it up to high, or if you're using really fast attack times, you can bump it up to high. But it's going to increase the CPU load. So that's attack time. Release time, much the same. Attack is how quickly it's clamping down. Release time is how quickly it's relaxing. And again, it's like quite easy to actually see this. Especially on these snare hits. You can literally just see. That's a fast release. Slow release. So you can see it's just relaxing really slowly. And up here, we're at 5 seconds. So we've got a really big range, 25. Anything less than that, you start to kind of risk distortion. But if we wanted to just catch that transient, so right now, all it's doing is catching that snare transient and then it's letting go of it really quickly so that we're not really doing anything other than catching that transient and that kick. So release time, yeah, a really common way of describing that is kind of tuning it to the tempo of the song to almost kind of align with the tempo or the feel. You can do that. Like that's definitely one approach. For example, making sure the compressor is getting back to kind of a zero state between snare hits. Otherwise, if you go longer than that, it's fine. You can if you want to, but you're not kind of getting the full kind of clamp down and relax, clamp down and relax. Instead, you're just kind of going down here and then operating down here because it never gets back to zero. But I like to think of it as aggression as well. So like slower release. Again, there's all of these things in compressors that slow things down, whether it's slower release, softer knee, peak versus RMS, feedback versus feed forward. They all kind of have the same rough impact, which is slowing things down. And that tends to sound more musical, gooier, deeper. The same difference we heard there between like hard knee and soft knee is going to be very similar to the difference you hear between like peak and RMS or feedback and feed forward. And with release, I also think of it as just another version of that. It's almost like aggression. Faster release is going to sound more aggressive. Slower release is going to sound less aggressive. So if we use, let's just pull up a preset, SSL bus. The other thing you can hear there, just to notice, I've got this in auto gain, which we can move on to next. And you could hear that it kind of it caught up because the auto gain takes a second or two to kind of catch up with the audio. So just something to be aware of if you're using it. That's something that's thrown a few people off is they're hearing changes in level that don't correlate with kind of adjusting the threshold on the compressor. That's because the auto makeup gain is kind of listening and it's looking at kind of a larger time scale and adjusting. So you could hear there when I was like in really slow attack and went to fast, it got quieter initially because we're the oh sorry, that was attack. Same with release. The opposite. It got louder because suddenly we're not clamping down as much because in slow release you can see here the compressor even when it's relaxed was still only letting off a couple of dB, so it was a lot quieter. Fast release, now the compressor is like fully relaxing between all of these hits, so it's doing less gain reduction, therefore the audio is louder. Initially it sounded louder and then the auto gain kind of caught up and was like, okay, cool, it's gotten louder, now let's adjust the output. So that's release. Auto release is really handy, and that basically it makes it almost kind of source dependent. The way that the auto release works, again, this is all in the manual. If I just search auto release, maybe it's so it's variable between 250 milliseconds to 8 seconds. Basically, think of it as like the more aggressive you go with your gain reduction, the longer the release will be. So if you're doing lots of gain reduction, it will edge towards this kind of 8 second end of the spectrum. And it's not literally just flicking back and forth between like 250 milliseconds and 8 seconds. It's like a range. But if you're compressing really aggressively, it's going to go slower because that will kind of correlate with generally what people want. Like if you had more aggressive gain reduction and a faster release, it's going to get kind of crazy. Whereas if you're just doing a little bit of gain reduction, you can get away with a fast release. So we'll be able to see this if we, again, we can kind of see this release stage here. If we go more aggressive, versus less aggressive, not a huge difference. But it's just an easy way to kind of have like a medium range release time that's source dependent. If you just don't even want to think about it, you can just chuck it on. But it does sound quite different. So if we go kind of like 500, like a medium release versus like auto release, we can compare them. For the sound of auto release, it's kind of giving it a bit more energy. Not a huge difference, but if you were using like really extreme settings, it would be more radical. But super handy. Auto release is great. I use it quite a lot. Any questions about release before we move on? Do you provide a cheat sheet of presets for each instrument and vocal type, a place to start? So we don't have that for instruments. We could add that. What we have right now in the manual is kind of a cheat sheet for different analog models, and some of these correlate with instruments. So, for example, 1176 is normally what you'd use on drums. Bus compressor is what you would use on, your mix bus or a master. Same for API 2500. DBX 160, again, that tends to be like drums quite commonly, but also, yeah, it says here instruments in general is fine. LA2A, great for vocals. Vari great on mix bus as well. So we could add that. I'm trying to remember if that's in the mastering.com cheat sheet binder. If we go into kind of recommended settings, we tend to not kind of teach that way and focus more on kind of like fundamentals so that you get a general understanding and then can be versatile, applying that understanding to different instruments rather than just kind of memorizing what different instruments should have. But we can go into that a bit more today as well, kind of recommended starter settings. Other than that, I would just say the presets. We don't have a cheat sheet, but there's a bunch of presets. And if you use the preset, this is part of this kind of interesting relationship between this compressor actually being really simple and just sounding good out the box if you want it to, because the default preset, yeah, sounds good. And then if you go to all these different ones, they have auto threshold. So it's kind of like one click compression, like you find what you want. And because of the auto threshold, it's like it's going to do everything for you. So you can kind of pick something and then just observe, see what settings have been used. So it's like, okay, when we go to a snare, oh, we've got like a fast attack, auto release, medium knee versus like a mix bus slow. We've gone to like 30 milliseconds, but still auto release, which is interesting, and a slightly softer knee, lower ratio. So you can kind of get to know different instruments by using the presets, and then you can see everything there. You can see the settings, you can see what's happening under the hood, and that's what helps you learn. So yeah, full circle there. We don't have cheat sheets, but presets basically do that for you. What do the presets do? Yeah, so it will load up the settings. Obviously, you can tweak from there. So I loaded up that SSL drum bus preset, but then I think I played around with like the threshold and the ratio a little bit just to kind of tune it in and get more aggressive compression. But it gives you like a starting point. Then you can tweak from there or not. For the most part, like again, a lot of these have auto threshold. So one of the drums, probably Modern Glue. New York. So yeah, and we can dig into auto threshold a lot more, but I think that's going to have to be like a whole section in of itself. But yeah, because of that, you can just load up the presets and they're going to work. And then if you just want more or less compression, it kind of now you've got like a one knob compressor. It's like, okay, I'm going to pick a preset, and then if I want more compression, I can just pull this to the left. So that's one way to do it. I think, yeah, we might need to make that more aggressive on 0%. If you want to slam it. then sometimes you have to go into manual mode. In auto releases, grayed out at the value release. Yeah, just so that you know. So, for example, if you're an optical, which has a preset kind of attack and release, and basically like intelligent or variable attack and release, so then you can't tweak them. Or here, for example, if you put it into auto, it grays it out because, yeah, it's not doing anything at that point because it's overriding it. Is each preset its own default then? No, think of it more as a starting point. I guess yeah, default is like a universal preset, basically. And then these are like specific for different instruments, different situations, um, mix, bus, mastering, that kind of stuff. Okay, let's have a break. Then we'll go through all the kind of the gain type stuff. So like auto gain, auto threshold. After that, we'll move on to advanced modules, and then we'll do some mixing.